The mistake that Keynes and Keynesian guys made is the thought that what this world really depends upon is growth, and that growth is good. You know, and he used the term animal spirits. You know, and what they were all reacting to was that we had a bubble fueled by the Federal Reserve in 1929 that led to a collapse, that led to a real calamity, a deflationary calamity. And they had a hard time getting out of that. And you know, Roosevelt grabbed the gold. A million things happened, and they came to the conclusion that deflation was evil and bad. And deflation is not evil and bad. Deflation means your money buys more over time. We had good deflation throughout the entire 19th century. I mean, wages, you know, the price of cigars, all this stuff didn't.
Purchasing power going up is deflation. Purchasing power going down is inflation.
Correct.
Yes.
And so wages maybe were flat in some cases, in some jobs in the 1800s, but things got cheaper because of productivity and efficiency.
Right.
And that's the way the world should work, and that's what Jeff Booth talks about in his book, and it's brilliant. The Keynesians came along and said, well, we don't ever want to have that deflation again, so we got to wire the system to always grow. And the way we do that is we hold the price of money artificially low, and we incentivize people to get into debt. And by getting into debt, then they have to keep running like a hamster on a treadmill, and so they're going to grow, you know, the debt level, but the income level is not going to grow equivalently. And at some point, that chart that I pinned as my tweet is what I call the perfect example of Stein's law. Herbert Stein was the economist in the Nixon administration who said, if something cannot go on forever, it will end. It's a pretty simple law, right? I mean, I love it.
Almost by definition.
It's pretty fucking basic, right? The tricky part is that when you have a money printer, you can delay the point at which it will end.
Yes.
And there's, you know, and you know, to be honest, my grandfather thought it was going to end in 1971,
right,
when we went off the gold standard, and we had a big boost of inflation.
Right.
And I remember in 79 and 80, there was talk that the dollar was going to fail. There really was.
Yes.
You know, the gold had gone from 35 to 800, and everyone was panicked.
Yes.
Okay. You know, Volcker came in. They put huge real rates up. They got it all under control. They put the menace back in the can for a while. We had a bunch of good decades, but they didn't solve the underlying problem, which is that Keynesians use debt to try to generate growth.
Right.
And it's like most things.
The tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, and a little bit of debt used in the right way is actually a productive thing, because if you're doing it to, you know, build a well and then people have cheap water and they live better lives. And I mean, that's productive debt where you get a return on it, and the return exceeds the value of the cost or the cost of taking it on. But what happens over time is you forget about that part, and you just figure, let's borrow and spend. Right. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we're now at the point where, you know, the long run. I mean, Keynes said something that I consider to be. I mean, I think Keynes was a very evil guy. I mean, he was a British elite. He was a pedophile. He was just a piece of shit. And he said something that I thought, you know, any Christian would just abhor, and that he said, well, it doesn't matter because in the long run we're all dead. Yeah. Which is a way of saying we could screw the shit out of our kids. You know, who gives a fuck? You know, we're all going to die and we don't care. So therefore, we can do this unsound thing because in the long run we're all dead. I mean, what an evil piece of shit. And yet we all worship, I should say, you know, American economists worship Keynesian economics. Yes. And it's fundamentally flawed. What we should be trying to achieve is not, you know, so again, they were trying to achieve growth. To get growth, they used debt, and that was kind of the model. That's not the model that we should be using. The model we should be using is we want efficiency. Yeah. Okay. We don't want net growth. We don't want bigger numbers. We want to get more for less. Yes. More, that's called a productivity increase. Yes. Right. If you're milling cotton and you got people picking out the seeds by hand, that takes a lot of human labor, and that's why we had slaves. Yeah. Okay. You know, you're Eli Whitney, you come along, you invent a cotton gin, you can feed this thing through and you can do 10x the volume. Yes. And now you've got, you know, that's improvement. That's productivity improvement. Yes. That didn't have anything to do with the growth of the money. You didn't need that. You made things better. Right. And so that's really what we need, is we need a more efficient system. And to get a more efficient system, it's incredibly important that the inputs are right. Yeah. And the inputs involve what's the cost of capital. And the cost of capital is the interest rate.
Yes.
And so if you fuck with the interest rate
Right.
and you hold it at zero and you say there is no cost of capital,
Right.
you get malinvestment. This is classic Austrian theory.
Price fixing.
Yeah, it's price fixing.
Yeah.
And the money goes to areas where it's not generating increased productivity.
Yes.
And the world is full of that. And we've got all these bubbles of just bullshit that we've invested in, ESG, all kinds of crap that don't make sense, that in a sound money environment would not be financeable and would not occur.
Exactly.
And so that's, that's kind of my 5-second rant on why Keynesianism is just evil and broken, and why we need to return to a sound money system.
Yeah, and a great rant explaining the causal pathway by which we go from fake money to fake food to fake news to fake everything. Like you debase the quality of the money, the purchasing power of the money. You by extension start to debase the quality of all goods and services.
Yeah, there's a great guy in Switzerland, Tony Devon. People should Google it and look at the old YouTube of him talking about how, when you have fiat money, when you have fake money, you get fake morals, you get fake, everything gets debased. And a perfect example of this is, the debauchery in Weimar Germany in the 1920, 21, 22 period, as the money was failing, everyone just takes a, live for today attitude. This is why,
they also had the gender fluidity thing going on.
Of course,
all we have that going on today.
Yeah.
Was that a coincidence?
Well, yeah, right. And the lottery, people, people, entertain themselves with bread and circuses. All they care about is going to the Taylor Swift concert or watching this game or that game.
Yeah.
They're not focused on what's really important in terms of improving the quality of their lives.
Yes.
Which is to say, doing effective and efficient things. And then, by the way, knowing that they've got savings that they can enjoy. I think one of the biggest evils of Keynesianism is the way that when the money is being debased, nobody can theoretically retire safely. And a great story I know, a guy who's my age, 66, has a good job, has a house that's paid off, has $2 million of savings. So he's done fine by almost anyone's standards, right? And he says to himself, I can't retire. The reason I can't retire is I might live another 30 years, and I don't know if $2 million is enough to get me through that. Isn't that sad?
Yeah.
And because if gasoline's $50 a gallon, $2 million isn't going to be enough.
Right.
But
this is a guy basically in the top 1% of global wealth.
I was going to say
top 5% U.S. probably. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's like, and that to me is the evil of the system that we currently have. One ought to be able to use their labor to accumulate wealth, knowing that that wealth will be intact, and then allow them to give back to society, help their grandkids, whatever, right? And that's gone. You can't do that in the system.
And so again, in an attempt to try to demystify some of this Keynesian nonsense and probably tie this into your last story there, money comes into existence when we produce more than we consume.
Correct.
Right? That's literally what you do when you go to work. You produce something, a good or service, and you're paid money.
Yes.
And now that money is potential consumption, right? You can take that into the market and consume goods or services with that money.
That somebody else produced.
Exactly. Now, if you don't consume that money and you hold it in savings, well, then what has the economy received? The economy has received your production of goods and services without you consuming anything back from it.
Correct.
Right? So you have a claim on the market that you have not exercised yet.
That's right.
So when Keynesian, under the philosophy of Keynesianism, they often say they produce money out of thin air, right? As you were describing earlier, the idea, and this is an exact inversion of economic reality, is that, when there's an economic recession, that we need to stimulate consumption through the printing of money to then encourage more production.
Correct.
Of course, economic reality is that you cannot consume what has not yet been produced.
Correct.
So production must precede consumption, not the opposite.
Right.
Now, when you print money out of thin air, again, as we said earlier, money comes into existence when you produce more than has been consumed. Right. So obviously, when you produce money and no production has occurred, it's eating the seed corn, right?
Exactly.
This is the sowing and reaping. Well, you're reaping before sowing, right? And what does it do? It destroys the amount of goods and services and the quality of goods and services available in the marketplace. So we have an entire mainstream university curriculum centered on Keynesian economics. It's the only thing you learn in school, by the way. There's no Austrian economics whatsoever.
It's extremely hard to find Austrian economic courses in this country.
It doesn't exist. I have a master's in accounting and finance. We learned a lot of economics. It was all Keynesian, right? The Economist magazine, one of the most popular publications on earth, all Keynesian economics.
Yeah.
Austrian economics really is sort of relegated to the dustbin in many ways, pre-Bitcoin. Thank God for Bitcoin.
Well, and the Austrians had it right. I mean, they actually, if you look at what happened in the 20s and 30s, they had it right, and yet they've been ignored.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this idea of producing money out of thin air, but there's no, again, if the money is not the wealth, the money is a representation of the wealth. So if you're producing money without engaging in any production of goods or services,
correct,
then it is everywhere and always just an instrument for stealing the goods and services that other people have produced.
That's right.
So it really is that simple. And yet, I guess through 100+ years of Keynesian indoctrination, people have been convinced that we need to print money to solve problems. And
absolutely.
It always blows my mind.
And if we were to go to the gold standard, we'd have a Great Depression.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
exactly.
I mean, they've managed to demonize all the fixes for their problems.
Yes. Right? But if you take 20 seconds of critical thinking and you sit down and you're like, okay, there's an economic recession. People aren't getting enough food, shelter, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Do you really think printing pieces of paper is going to put food in people's mouths or put shelter over people's heads? No. The answer is work and production creates those things, not money. Money is just the means to facilitate trade between people that allows us to specialize and therefore become more productive over time. But the actual printing of money is not going to do anything to produce anything.
Right. Well, if you're a politician, it might produce votes.